Welcome back to Face the Nation. We turn now to Mayor Victor Trevino for a look at what's going on in the southwestern border of Texas in Laredo. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. A few days ago, you said your city was boarding up like a hurricane in preparation for the end of Title 42. Does your city have the resources it needs? Do you feel like the hurricane has passed?
Well, first of all, there's no doubt that we're seeing historic challenges in our border. And as a doctor, I had already been seeing this. Even before the end of Title 42, our local hospitals were already at or near capacity, and there's no pediatric intensive care unit. But everything that we have been doing since the declaration of emergency has held up, and we have not been overwhelmed at this point. But yesterday, we did receive around 700 migrants. And however, because we received the overflow from El Paso and Brownsville, we're still at high alert. And until we see the numbers at the Border Patrol custody centers go down, this is when we can say the episode had passed.
You just said that there is no pediatric health center in your area. You said you were already medically underserved as a community. What's the health situation for the migrants, particularly the children that are coming?
Yes, before they are mainly individuals, now they're family units. And family units have children that have traveled miles and miles, and obviously that they will need some medical care. So because we don't have the pediatric intensive care unit in our city, that makes it concerning, because as it is, we're at capacity most of the time in our hospitals, and ambulances sometimes have to wait outside the emergency room or 1 or 2 hours before we can treat patients. Now, with this surge, this was very concerning. That's why we activated the declaration of a disaster.
The mayor of El Paso was just with us, and he said he was getting what he needed from the state and federal government and thanked Homeland Security. Do you agree? Are you getting what you need?
Well, we're getting the buses, and migrants come in, they get processed, they get sent to our NGOs, and the amount of migrants we're expecting initially, the big flow, is not here yet. And a lot of things have to do with Mexico taking some migrants, and the asylum rules have changed. You have to ask for asylum in different countries before you get here. Mm-hmm. And also Title 8 changed. You have to, if you get deported, then you could face being barred for 5 years. And also with the event of the TRO, that changed things a little bit. You have to get a court date before you get paroled into the detentions, into the NGOs.
Right. You're talking about all the things the Biden administration has tweaked to make it essentially more difficult for those going through asylum, though still having that legal pathway there. More difficult, meaning there are more restrictions around it. When you hear presidential candidates talk about shutting down the border, what do you think about that?
I think this is not a Democratic or Republican problem. It's an American problem. And things should have been done a long time ago. Immigration and reform is long overdue. And what we're seeing now is a result of that. And as Americans, we need to do better as a country. And the leader of the free world, these are things that we are the example of humanitarian efforts. But we have to have the laws also to coincide and do a balance with that.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of Americans would agree with that. Where do you see the disconnect between the conversations in Washington and what you are seeing on the ground?
I think that's one of the reasons we have to have real-time information from Border Patrol and people that work and live here. Border mayors and cooperation is crucial. We need to have these things set, and they need to listen and come down here to see what the actual situation is. And that is the disconnect I see that has been happening. Unless they get the real-time information and the real perception of what things are, then I think they can move on and make adequate rules.
All right. Mr. Mayor, thank you for your time. Good luck to you. We turn now to the economy and the new chairman of the National Economic Council, Lael Brainard. She was most recently the #2 at the Federal Reserve. Welcome to Face the Nation. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day to you too, Margaret.
You have certainly been busy in this new job. I want to ask you about where we are with the state of negotiations over the debt ceiling. The president has said talks are moving along. The Secretary of the Treasury said negotiators have found some areas of agreement. That sounds like movement. How close are we to a deal?
Yeah, so the staff is very engaged. I would characterize the engagement as serious, as constructive. And, you know, I think it is, though, Margaret, helpful to just lift up and talk a little bit about what is at stake here. So when I talk to CEOs, to business leaders around the country, they tell me things are actually going very well. But their biggest concern is that Congress might fail to prevent default, and that would be catastrophic. Yeah. It would lead to higher borrowing costs for cars, for mortgages, for small businesses, even for the U.S. government. And so the most important thing is making sure that Congress fulfills its basic responsibility to avert default.
You said talks were constructive. I know Leader McConnell said the U.S. is not going to default. And the president, when he spoke, he said there was substantial movement in the sense that most everyone agreed that the defaulting the debt is off the table. So you're saying it's not necessarily off the table?
So default is something that Congress knows how to avoid. Congress has
acted. It's still very much a risk.
Congress has acted 78 times in a row to avert default, to prevent default, and we know they have done it. They certainly did it 3 times under the last administration. So our expectation is that Congress will do what is necessary, even as we continue to have parallel discussions on the budget, which is a normal thing that Congress needs to do every year.
And that's what you're talking about now? The
Absolutely.
So the president was asked if the only option was a short-term lift of the debt ceiling, and he said he still thought there was time for a whole deal. Is that what you're saying? It's budget and debt ceiling, and this can get done before June 1st?
You know, short-term is not a fix, is not really addressing that core uncertainty that CEOs are talking about. It's just really important to take default and address it, and Congress has the tools to do that. They've done it again 78 times previously. Meanwhile, we also are at the staff level seeing productive discussions around the budget separately but in parallel. And those discussions are also important. And of course, that's something that Congress wrestles with every year. And so our hope is that those conversations also continue and arrive at a constructive place.
So the goal is still whole deal by June 1st.
So right now, the focus is on the budget and those discussions, but our expectation is that Congress will act to avert default in a timely manner.
So you were just talking about your conversations with business leaders. I mean, it seems like we're in this game of chicken here. J.P. Morgan Chase's CEO, Jamie Dimon, said that he set up a war room for contingency planning. They meet once a week, and he's going to have them start meeting multiple times, potentially starting next Sunday. So he's planning for potentially the worst. Was it a mistake to let things get to this point, where you have the head of the largest bank of America in America having to do this? Should the White House have started negotiating earlier?
So this is really a responsibility of Congress. Let's just step back again. The U.S. always pays its bills. The discussions over the debt ceiling, Congress's basic obligation, is really just about paying the bills Congress has already passed laws to authorize. And so the conversations that are ongoing right now really very much focused on the budget, which is the future of the fiscal commitments that the U.S. Can make. But in terms of the responsibility to pay our bills, America isn't a deadbeat nation. We do pay our bills. Congress has always acted, and they know how to do it, and they have the capacity to do it in a timely manner.
Sure, but the bottom line is you have to get to a deal by a hard date on the calendar. So more time, I think, would have been helpful, no?
So, again, that is Congress's basic responsibility. I think there is a very clear record here where the American people want the U.S. to pay its bills. And I'm sure Congress will see its way clear to making sure that happens.
I'm going to ask you about banks in America. The Fed is the main regulator for many American banks. That's where you were before you came to the White House. You said the banking system is sound back in April. But since that time, we saw another bank failure. We're still seeing pressure. Why still, if it's actually sound?
So it's important to remember, Margaret, that our banking system has nearly 5,000 banks, banks of all sizes, small community banks in small communities all over the country to the largest banks, the money center banks. And so, back in March, we did see the failure of 3 banks that are of mid-sized banks, and those were dealt with in a way where depositors never had any question but that they would have access to their deposits. So in that sense, Americans have confidence. The banking regulators took strong actions. We have the tools, and they can be used again. But more broadly, though, the banking system is sound, although we are monitoring very carefully.
But doesn't the fact that we still see pressure here show the government's sort of ad hoc decision-making on backstopping depositors hasn't solved the problem?
So, look, the environment has changed a lot over the last few years with interest rates going up by a large amount. And banks, several banks that have now failed and been taken over by healthier banks, didn't manage their risks. Right. Those were isolated problems. But of course, we're all monitoring the situation very carefully. But we have the tools. We've taken strong actions. I think people know what the playbook is. So in that sense, the system overall is sound. I can't speak to particular institutions. Obviously, that sits with the bank regulators. But overall, you've seen that the banking system is sound and deserves continued vigilance.
All right. Lael Brainard, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment. Here in the U.S., maternal mortality is at a 60-year high, with minority women facing a disproportionately higher rate. Democratic Congresswoman Lauren Underwood joins us from Naperville, Illinois. Good morning to you, Congresswoman.
Good morning, Margaret. Happy Mother's Day.
Thank you very much for saying that. Happy Mother's Day to all mothers out there. Can you tell me, with those mothers in mind, why are so many American women dying?
So we know that the United States leads the industrialized world in maternal deaths. And since 2018, maternal deaths have increased 89%. We've seen deaths among moms in all racial and ethnic groups. And a lot of that has been due to the COVID pandemic. 80% of these deaths are preventable. We know why moms are dying, and we know what policy solutions to take to save moms' lives. And so I've introduced a piece of legislation called the Momnibus, which is that evidence-based solution to end this crisis.
You put forward that package actually in 2020, again in 2021, including when Democrats controlled Congress. And I know Vice President Harris has been an ally on many of these issues, but why didn't Democratic leadership push more of these into, progress? Like, you're still chipping away at this.
You're right. So in 2021, we were so pleased that the first bill from the Momnibus, the Protecting Moms Who Served Act to support our veteran moms, was signed into law by President Biden. That piece of legislation passed the House with unanimous bipartisan support. So you are absolutely right. The American people are united behind this as a priority, a shared value, and we've had broad bipartisan support from the Congress to solve this problem. We have several bills within the package that are bipartisan at this time. We have another bill to protect veteran moms called the Maternal Health for Veterans Act. We have one to address maternal mental health conditions and substance use disorders, and another to make sure that the technology tools that are available on the market are available to all moms across the country.
You said many of these, but none of those things that you are proposing now have a promise to make it to the president's desk, right? I mean, you've got to really push this and build a bipartisan coalition to turn this into law. Do you have Republican allies?
Absolutely. So the Black Maternal Health Caucus is one of the largest bipartisan caucuses on Capitol Hill. As I've outlined, there are several pieces within the Momnibus that do have bipartisan support, and we're coming on the heels of passing 80% of the Momnibus through the House in the last Congress. And so we have a pathway to getting this piece of legislation signed into law this year, and we are working hard with our colleagues across the aisle in the House and the Senate to do so.
So Black and Native American women are disproportionately affected by maternal health issues. There have been books like The Pain Gap by Anousheh Hussain that have characterized this as medical misogyny and institutionalized racism. How much of a factor are those things?
Well, we certainly know that Black moms are 3 to 4 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related complications. We know that Hispanic moms saw the largest increase year over year in the most recent CDC data, and we know that Native American moms have significant disparities as well. But I want to be clear that this is a problem that touches every mom and all of our families in this country. Doesn't matter if it's an urban or rural community, doesn't matter if you live on the East Coast or West Coast or in the South. This is something that touches all of our lives, and so we need to make sure that we're passing these solutions that solve the problems that we're facing in our healthcare system.
So according to CDC, the deadliest states to give birth, those with the highest maternal mortality rates, are Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, and Louisiana. These are all states with very large rural areas. Is it simply a lack of access to facilities?
So that's part of it. We're seeing a lot of consolidation in our rural healthcare systems, a lot of hospital closures. Moms aren't able to get into a facility of their choice to deliver their babies. And we also know that there is some real inequities when we talk about Medicaid and Medicaid expansion. We're losing half of our moms in that postpartum period, a third in that extended postpartum period, where in a lot of these states, Medicaid coverage does cut off after 60 days postpartum. That's why I'm such a big supporter, and the Black Maternal Health Caucus is a big supporter of a mandatory year-long postpartum Medicaid expansion that my colleague Robin Kelly has been leading in the Congress.
And that matters because these maternal mortality rates, it's not just dying in the process of giving birth, it's going up to 40 days after giving birth. So if your health care cuts off at 60 days.
A full year postpartum.
Yeah.
So that's right.
Yeah. So those dates are key to you. I want to also ask you about what we just heard in the recent days, that there were 2 children, 2 unaccompanied minors, one 4 and one 17 years old, who recently died in U.S. custody. I know you were very critical of the Trump administration when this happened on their watch. What do you make of this happening again?
In the United States, we shouldn't have children dying in our custody, and we have to continue to make sure that there is robust support along the border for those agencies that are caring for migrant children, to make sure that they're getting the needed medical care. And I'm certainly focused on doing a thorough investigation of these deaths.
You think these may have been preventable?
I don't know. We don't know. I've not gotten those details yet. But since that time in the Trump administration, we have had success in shepherding resources to bolster the medical contracts and the services that are offered to migrant families along the border while they're in U.S. custody. And since that time, we had not had any deaths of children in custody. Again, in the United States, we should not have children dying while in U.S. custody. That's unacceptable, and we certainly will be pursuing an investigation.
Okay. Well, Congresswoman, we will look for progress on that investigation and with your bill here as you continue pushing for more protections for women giving birth in this country. Thank you for your time today, and we will be right back. On this Mother's Day, we want to take a look at the power of moms.
Ever since I became one, the phrase mommy lands differently. My 2-year-old is learning to talk, but he can shout mommy at the top of his lungs. His 4-year-old brother shouts it daily around 3 a.m. It rarely fails to make me jump. That 5-letter phrase has so much embedded in it. Help me, I'm scared, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I want you to make it better. It's inevitable that one day they'll learn I'm not all-powerful. But motherhood means you don't stop wanting to help. Whether it is mothers organizing to push for better schools or to stop violence in them or walking across continents to find them a better life. Writer Elizabeth Stone said that having a child is to decide forever to have your heart go walking outside your body. Motherhood is hard. I think of my own mom now with wonderment at how hard it must have been to juggle it all. I've learned multitasking is a distinctly mom trait. My mother is one of the most sensitive and creative people that I know. She still answers around-the-clock calls for help from her kids and my wonderful dad. I'm also grateful to my mother-in-law for raising a great son and often riding to the rescue of her grandkids. America has asked a lot of its moms in recent years. Today should not be the only day we take the time to say thank you. We could not do it without you.
Some of my fellow CBS moms and I did a Facebook Live conversation late last week. If you want to see it, you can find it on our Face the Nation YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. And to all you moms out there, happy Mother's Day. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.